She was fired by text at Comic-Con. Her legal clause destroyed the CEO's career. I was standing in front of the main stage at London Comic-Con, my fingertips having just brushed against Tom Hiddleston's freshly signed poster, when my phone buzzed against my hip. A single notification. A text message, brief and cold. "We're done. We're moving on." Younger energy. No meeting, no warning, no reason. Just fired via text after 14 years of dedication to a company I'd once saved from bankruptcy. But that CEO had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who had written the clause that would dismantle his career. My name is Samantha Cole. Until approximately 90 seconds ago, I was the content director at Mythverse Media, Europe's titan of geek culture and entertainment news. At 41, I had navigated the company through industry shifts that had sunk our competitors. I'd built communities, negotiated streaming deals, and weathered the storms of online backlash that came with the territory. The London Excel Centre hummed with the energy of 50,000 fans surrounding me. The massive hall was a kaleidoscope of cosplay, merchandise stands, and the constant flash of phones capturing moments. I stood frozen in the middle of it all, staring at the 3 brief sentences that had ended my career. "Sam, you okay?" Vivian Shore appeared at my elbow, her press badge swinging as she leaned in. As editor-in-chief of Nexus Pulse with its 2.7 million followers, Vivian was both my closest industry ally and the most dangerous person to witness my professional execution. I handed her my phone wordlessly. She read the message, her eyes widening behind her tortoiseshell glasses. "That absolute," she began, the rest of her sentence disappearing into the roar of applause as the Marvel panel introduced its next speaker. I took my phone back, swiping away Griffin Cade's message. Griffin, our 35-year-old CEO who'd been appointed 8 months ago, had been systematically replacing veteran staff with younger faces. Faces that, as he put it in company meetings, spoke Gen Z fluently. "Well," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. At least he didn't use an emoji. As if summoned by my comment, my phone buzzed again. A thumbs-up emoji from Griffin. "Just that." Vivian's expression shifted from shock to rage. "He can't do this. 14 years. Sam. 14 years you've given them." I smiled, not the reaction she expected, a pointed departure from Griffin's younger energy mandate. 1 year after that fateful text message at London Comic-Con, I found myself back at the same event, this time leading Convergence's expanded coverage team. Our platform had grown beyond conventions to encompass broader geek culture, always maintaining our commitment to authenticity and community focus. The Excel Center felt different this time, not because it had changed physically, but because I walked confidently through the halls, greeting creators and fans who had become regular contributors or featured subjects in our coverage. "There she is," called a familiar voice. I turned to see Vivian approaching, accompanied by a woman I recognized immediately, Alicia Tam, the former Mythverse intern who had been one of the first to speak out about Cairo's harassment. "Alicia's agreed to join our mentorship program," Vivian explained. "She'll be coordinating our student journalist initiative." "That's fantastic news," I said, genuinely pleased. Alicia had shown remarkable courage during the scandal, and her subsequent writing on convention culture had impressed us both. "Your story inspired me," Alicia told me, "not just standing up to them, but building something better afterward." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride not in myself, but in what we'd created together. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Taking difficult experiences and transforming them into something meaningful. As we continued through the convention, I noticed a small booth in the corner of the indie section, a modest setup with a handmade banner reading "Second Chances Comics." Behind the table sat Griffin Cade, looking nothing like the polished CEO I remembered. He was selling self-published comics, speaking animatedly with the few visitors who stopped by. "Well, that's unexpected," Vivian murmured, following my gaze. "Should we avoid that section?" Alicia asked, clearly uncomfortable. I considered the question, then shook my head. "No, his presence doesn't dictate our movements. As we approached, Griffin noticed us. His expression cycled rapidly through surprise, embarrassment, and resignation. He straightened slightly as we reached his booth. "Samantha," he acknowledged with a stiff nod. "And Vivian." "Griffin," I replied evenly. "I didn't expect to see you here." He gestured to his modest display. "Back to basics. It's what I should have been doing all along, really." Before the venture capital and the executive suite, I examined one of his comics. A surprisingly introspective story about a fallen business mogul finding redemption through creativity. The artwork was amateur but earnest. "You created these yourself?" I asked. He nodded. "Art therapy, initially. Then it became something more." He hesitated, then added, "I've been following Convergence. You've built something significant." "We have," I agreed, neither accepting nor rejecting the implicit olive branch. An awkward silence followed, broken when Vivian pointedly checked her watch. "We should get to the main stage for the opening ceremonies." I nodded, returning the comic to Griffin's table. "Good luck with your new venture." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "Thank you. And I'm sorry. For everything. Not that it matters now." I considered his apology, weighing its sincerity against the damage he had caused. "It matters," I said finally. "Not enough to erase what happened, but it matters." As we walked away, Alicia looked at me curiously. "How do you feel about seeing him like that?" I considered her question carefully. "I don't feel the satisfaction I might have expected, just perspective. We all end up somewhere we didn't anticipate. Some endings are better than others," Vivian noted dryly. I smiled, thinking of the text message that had started it all. It wasn't an ending. That's what Griffin never understood. When he fired me, he thought he was writing the final chapter of my story. Instead, he was just setting up the plot twist. Later that evening, as our team gathered to review the day's coverage, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The betrayal and anger had faded, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt more genuine than anything I had experienced at Mythverse. "I have something to share," I announced to our assembled team. "Convergence has been offered acquisition deals from 3 major media companies in the past month." Murmurs rippled through the group, a mix of excitement and concern. "And," prompted Vivian, who had been part of these preliminary discussions. "And we've declined them all," I continued. "Our independence isn't for sale, but we have accepted investment that will allow us to expand our coverage internationally while maintaining complete editorial control." Cheers erupted from the team. Someone opened champagne that had been strategically hidden for this announcement. As glasses were passed around, Marcus raised his in a toast. To Samantha, who turned a text message firing into a media revolution. "No," I corrected, raising my own glass. To all of us, who proved that experience matters, that authenticity resonates, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. We clinked glasses amid laughter and conversation. Outside our hotel meeting room, the London night buzzed with convention after-parties and networking events. Somewhere in that city, Griffin Cade was perhaps reflecting on his own journey from corporate peak to indie creator. My phone buzzed with a notification. Our coverage of the convention's opening day had broken traffic records for the site. I silenced it and returned to the celebration, no longer defined by messages appearing on that screen. The firing text that Griffin had sent with such casual disregard had altered the trajectory of my life. But the story it began wasn't his to write, it was mine. And unlike Griffin, I understood that the best stories aren't about tearing things down, but building something that lasts. As the evening wound down, Vivian found me by the window, gazing out at the London skyline. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I smiled. Just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if Griffin had called me into his office that day instead of sending a text. "You might still be at Mythverse, compromising your values for a steady paycheck," she suggested. "Possibly, or maybe this confrontation was inevitable, just a matter of timing." Vivian considered this. "Either way, I'd say things worked out pretty well." I nodded. watching the city lights shimmer. They did, but not because of Griffin's mistake. Because when faced with a choice between bitter revenge and constructive rebuilding, we chose the harder path. The better path, Vivian amended. The better path, I agreed. My phone buzzed again, an email this time from Eleanor Westfield. The subject line read, Potential Joint Venture, Exclusive Convention Network. I showed it to Vivian, who raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. What do you think? I pocketed the phone without opening the email. I think it can wait until tomorrow. Tonight is about celebrating how far we've come. And planning how much further we'll go, she added with a grin. I raised my glass one more time. To the future, on our terms. As our team continued celebrating around us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for that cold, dismissive text message that had once seemed like an ending. Griffin had been right about one thing. It was time for younger energy. But not in the way he had meant. The energy of new beginnings, of fresh perspectives, of building rather than destroying. Sometimes being fired is the first step toward finding your true purpose. And sometimes a legal clause buried in fine print becomes the foundation for something extraordinary. 6 months later, Convergence hosted its first independent convention, a 3-day event celebrating creators and communities that had been overlooked by mainstream media. We called it Next Verse, a subtle nod to our origins but with a clear focus on the future. The event sold out within hours of tickets going live. Creators from across Europe and beyond participated, many citing our platform's supportive coverage as instrumental to their growth. Panels focused on inclusivity, sustainability in merchandise production, and ethical community building. Mythverse sent representatives, now positioned as one industry voice among many, rather than the dominant force they had once been. Their new leadership team participated respectfully, openly acknowledging past mistakes during a panel on corporate responsibility in fan spaces. On the final day, as I moderated a discussion with emerging creators, I spotted a familiar face in the audience, Griffin Cade, sitting quietly in the back row, taking notes. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. After the panel, he approached cautiously. Impressive event, he said. You've created something special here. Thank you, I replied simply. I'm writing a graphic novel about corporate culture and accountability, he explained, showing me his notebook. Based on my experiences, it's partly confessional, partly cautionary tale. I glanced at his sketches, surprisingly thoughtful depictions of power dynamics and ethical compromises. Sounds worthwhile. I was hoping, he hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. I was hoping I could interview you for research. Your perspective would be valuable. The request caught me off guard. My immediate instinct was to refuse, to maintain the distance between us. But something in his demeanor, a genuine humility that the old Griffin had never possessed, made me reconsider. Send a proposal to our office, I said finally. I'll think about it. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. As he walked away, Vivian appeared at my side. Was that Griffin? What did he want? I explained his request. Vivian's expression was skeptical. Are you actually considering it? Maybe, I admitted. Not for his sake, but because the story might be worth telling. The complete story. From both sides. She nodded slowly. Your call. Just remember that you don't owe him anything. I know, but this isn't about debt or obligation. It's about moving forward. The convention concluded with an evening reception celebrating our community contributors, the photographers, writers, and creators who had helped build Convergence from concept to reality. As I looked around the room at the diverse faces, the animated conversations, the genuine connections being formed, I felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond professional success. This was what I had always wanted to create at Mythverse, but had been constrained by corporate priorities and profit margins. Here, authenticity wasn't just a marketing buzzword, but our foundational principle. Later that night, I sat alone in my hotel room, considering Griffin's interview request. On impulse, I opened my phone and found the text message that had started everything. I had never deleted it, keeping it as a reminder of how quickly things could change. We're done. We're moving on. Younger energy. The words no longer held any power over me. In fact, they seemed almost comically inadequate. A failed attempt to end a story that was only beginning. I drafted a brief email to Griffin. Regarding your interview request, I'm available next Thursday afternoon. 1 hour, on the record. I'll share my perspective honestly, including both the harm caused and the unexpected opportunities that emerged. This isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation, but about creating something meaningful from our shared history. After sending it, I turned off my phone and went to the window. The city below was still bustling with nightlife, with possibilities, with stories unfolding in countless unexpected ways. When Griffin had sent that text, he thought he was writing my ending. Instead, he had inadvertently given me the beginning I needed. The push to create something authentic, to build rather than compromise, to transform a moment of rejection into a foundation for growth. Sometimes the best response to being dismissed is to prove your value by creating something undeniable, not out of spite, but out of conviction. Not to destroy what hurt you, but to build something better in its place. That's the power of Clause 27B, not the legal leverage it provided, but the opportunity it created. An opportunity I would never have seized if Griffin had simply called me into his office that day. Sometimes, getting fired by text is the best thing that can happen to your career. And sometimes, the clause you wrote to protect yourself becomes the key that unlocks your future. The following Thursday, I met Griffin at a quiet cafe near our office. He arrived early, notebook in hand, visibly nervous. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said as I sat down. "I'm curious about your project," I replied honestly. "It's not the direction I expected you to take." He smiled ruefully. "Nothing about my life has gone as expected lately, but maybe that's not entirely bad." As we talked, I was struck by how much he had changed, or perhaps how much his true self had emerged once stripped of power and status. He listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions about my experience and genuinely reflecting on his mistakes. "The worst part," he admitted at one point, "is that I actually believed what I was saying about younger energy and all that. I convinced myself it was strategic, not discriminatory." "That's how bias usually works," I observed. "We rationalize it as something else." He nodded, making notes. "The company is doing better now, from what I hear, with the new leadership. They're making progress." I acknowledged. "Rebuilding trust takes time." "And you?" he asked. "Convergence seems to be thriving." "It is, because we built it on principles, not just profit motives." Griffin looked down at his notebook. "The irony isn't lost on me. By trying to push you out, I essentially funded your competition through that settlement." I shrugged. The money helped, but it wasn't the key factor. The clarity was, sometimes you need to lose something to understand what really matters. As our conversation wound down, Griffin closed his notebook and looked at me directly. "One last question, if you don't mind. If you could go back to that day at Comic-Con, knowing everything that would follow, would you still want to receive that text?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. Not because it was pleasant or fair, but because it forced me to confront realities I'd been ignoring. It was the push I needed to stop compromising and start creating. Griffin nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for your honesty, and for agreeing to talk. It means a lot." "I hope your graphic novel finds its audience," I said as we prepared to leave. "Everyone's story deserves to be told, even the uncomfortable ones." "Especially the uncomfortable ones," he amended with a sad smile. We parted ways on the street outside, not as friends, but as two people who had moved beyond the need for animosity. His story would continue in one direction, mine in another, both forever altered by 3 sentences and an emoji. 2 years after that text message, Convergence had expanded to cover conventions and fan communities across 3 continents. Our team had grown to over 50 full-time staff and hundreds of contributors, united by our commitment to authentic representation and ethical practices. Griffin's graphic novel, titled Younger Energy, was published by an independent press to modest but respectable reviews. He sent me a signed copy with a simple inscription, "Thank you for the lesson I needed." Mythverse continued under its new leadership, never regaining its former dominance but finding a more sustainable balance between commerce and community. Eleanor occasionally reached out with collaboration proposals, some of which we accepted when they aligned with our values. Kairovex eventually reemerged on a smaller platform, his content noticeably more thoughtful and his behavior more professional. Whether this represented genuine growth or merely calculated rebranding remained an open question. As for me, I found myself increasingly drawn to mentoring emerging voices in the industry, particularly women over 40 who had been made to feel obsolete in digital spaces. Their stories echoed my own, experiences of being undervalued despite their expertise, of being pushed aside for younger energy. At a panel discussion during New York's major convention, a young journalist asked about my journey from corporate content director to independent media founder. "What advice would you give to someone facing professional rejection?" she asked. "How did you turn it into opportunity?" I thought about Griffin's text, about Clause 27B, about all the twists and turns that had led me to that stage. First, save the receipts, I began, drawing knowing laughter from the audience. Document everything, not for revenge, but for clarity. Second, know your worth beyond your job title. The skills and relationships you build are portable. They go with you even when the position doesn't. Third, understand that sometimes rejection is redirection. The path you thought you were meant to follow might actually be leading you away from your true purpose. And finally, remember that your story doesn't end when someone else tries to write its conclusion. The most powerful words in any narrative aren't the end, there, and then. As the applause echoed through the hall, I felt a profound sense of completion, not because my journey was over, but because it had transcended its origins. What had begun as a response to dismissal had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful, a commitment to creating spaces where experience was valued, where authenticity was paramount, and where no one's contribution could be dismissed with a casual text. Griffin's attempt to end my story had only ensured that it would continue in ways neither of us could have imagined. His younger energy had inadvertently sparked something far more powerful, the enduring energy of resilience, reinvention, and renewal. Sometimes being fired is just the beginning, and sometimes that beginning leads to a better story than you ever thought possible. I opened a password-protected folder on my phone labeled Clause 27B, the insurance. "I have something," I said quietly. Vivian's journalist instincts flared instantly. She grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the crowd toward a quieter corner near the exhibition hall's emergency exit. "What kind of something?" she asked, lowering her voice. "The kind that makes Griffin wish he'd at least had the decency to fire me face to face." Vivian's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam appearing in them. She'd built her reputation on exposing industry corruption and championing ethical media practices. "Meet me at the hotel bar at 9. Bring everything." I nodded, pocketing my phone as the crowd around us surged toward the signing booths. The day's panels and interviews continued in a blur. I went through the motions, recording the Avengers Reborn premiere presentation for a company that no longer wanted me. Old habits. As I navigated through the sea of attendees, memories of my 14 years at Mythverse played through my mind like a highlight reel. I'd started as a staff writer, covering fan conventions and obscure comic releases. Within 3 years, I was managing a team of writers. By year 5, I was directing content strategy across 6 European markets. When our founder sold the company to venture capitalists in 2019, I was the one who stabilized our community during the transition. When an influencer we'd partnered with was accused of sexual harassment at Paris Expo, I was the one who navigated us through the PR nightmare. I'd turned down offers from competitors, canceled vacations for emergency content pushes, and once conducted an interview with a major film director from a hospital bed after my appendectomy. Mythverse wasn't just my employer, it was my identity. And Griffin Cade had ended it all with fewer characters than a tweet. The Marriott bar was relatively quiet when I arrived at 8:55. Most convention attendees were at evening panels or private industry parties. Vivian sat at a corner table, already working on what appeared to be her second gin and tonic. "You're punctual even when you've been fired," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. A glass of red wine was waiting for me. She remembered my drink. "Force of habit," I replied. Sliding into the seat, I placed my phone and a small external drive on the table. Vivian eyed them like artifacts at an archaeological dig. "So, what's this insurance policy you mentioned?" I took a deep breath. "Before I show you, I need to know what you plan to do with it." She finished her drink, ice cubes clinking against the empty glass. "That depends on what you've got, doesn't it?" "I'm serious. Viv, this isn't just about me being bitter. This is about patterns of behavior that should never have been tolerated." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "You know my stance. I've spent my career exposing toxic workplace cultures. If what you have shows systematic problems at Mythverse, my readers deserve to know." I nodded, unlocking my phone and opening the folder. It started about 6 months ago, when Griffin began replacing senior staff with his new hires. He brought in Kyrovex to head up our streaming content. "The TikTok gamer?" Vivian asked, raising an eyebrow. "The one who cooks ramen shirtless while playing Elden Ring?" "The very same. 25 years old with 12 million followers but zero experience in media management. Griffin called him authentically connected to our core demographic." I showed her a screenshot of a Slack conversation between Griffin and the board, discussing how to manipulate viewership among females under 25. His exact words: "They don't want substance. They want personalities they can fantasize about." Vivian's jaw tightened as she read. "Charming." "That's just the appetizer," I said, swiping to the next document. "Here's the payment agreement that was made after that harassment incident in Paris. The one where we publicly claimed zero tolerance but privately paid for the influencer's silence." She scanned the document, her expression darkening. "How much?" 200,000 euros and a guaranteed 3-year contract renewal. "Jesus," she muttered. "And no one blew the whistle?" "Only 3 people knew. The CEO at the time, legal counsel, and me. I was told it was being handled appropriately and to focus on damage control." I paused. "I'm not proud of my silence." Vivian looked at me without judgment. "We've all made compromises we regret. What else?" I swiped to the final document. "This is Clause 27B. 4 years ago, when we expanded our convention partnerships, I negotiated this addition to my contract." She leaned forward to read, then let out a low whistle. "This gives you ownership rights to all Comic-Con collaborations if you're terminated without cause?" I nodded. At the time, it was meant to protect the relationships I'd built if there was ever a management change. I never thought I'd need to use it. "But Griffin just handed you the trigger," Vivian said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Does he know about this clause?" "It's buried in legal documentation that predates his arrival. I doubt he or his new legal team ever reviewed the fine print of legacy contracts." Vivian drained the last drops of her drink and signaled for another round. "So, what's your plan?" I hesitated, tracing the rim of my wine glass. "That depends on you. Mythverse is currently the title sponsor for 3 major Comic-Con events this year. Their booth setup alone costs millions, not to mention the exclusive panels and premiere access. And with this clause, you could pull the plug on all of it?" "Technically, yes, but I need to be strategic. Griffin would bury me in litigation if I moved too openly." Vivian's fresh drink arrived, and she took a contemplative sip. "What if you didn't have to move at all? What if the right questions just started getting asked? Publicly?" I recognized the glint in her eye. "What are you thinking?" "A soft launch, nothing direct, nothing that points to you as a source, just enough to make people start wondering what's happening at Mythverse. And then? Then we see how Griffin handles the pressure. Men like him always make mistakes when they're defensive. We just need to wait for the right one. I considered her proposal. It was less direct than I'd imagined, but potentially more effective. How would you start? Vivian pulled out her tablet, opening a blank document. An opinion piece. From icon to embarrassment. What's happening at Mythverse Media? No direct accusations, just observations about the company's shifting priorities and declining content quality. That could work. I agreed. Griffin is obsessed with the company's image. He'd hate that kind of spotlight. Exactly. And if he responds publicly, he'll likely overreact. I finished her thought. Create more openings. Vivian began typing notes. Meanwhile, we start looking more closely at Cairo Vex. I've heard rumors about his behavior at events. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of rumors? The kind that would make Griffin's influencer payoff look like a rounding error. For the first time since receiving that text, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for retribution, but for accountability. There's one more thing, I said, unlocking the external drive. Every email and message I've received from Griffin since he started, including his comments about female fans over 35 being walking billboards we don't have to pay for. Vivian's eyes widened. You kept everything? 14 years in digital media taught me one thing. Always save the receipts. She raised her glass in a toast. To the receipts, and to making Griffin Cade wish he'd never learned how to send a text message. I clinked my glass against hers, a strange calm settling over me. 2 consequences. True to her word, Vivian's article appeared on Nexus Pulse the next morning. It was masterfully crafted, raising questions rather than making accusations, noting Mythverse's declining engagement metrics and the exodus of veteran staff. She mentioned my departure only as a passing example, describing me as the architect behind their most successful community initiatives. By mid-afternoon, the article had been shared thousands of times. Industry forums were buzzing with speculation. Former Mythverse employees began commenting with vague but troubling anecdotes about recent company culture. Griffin's response came swiftly, a corporate statement posted across all Mythverse channels, dismissing the article as uninformed speculation and reaffirming the company's commitment to evolving with our audience. He announced an expanded role for Cairo Vex, putting him in charge of all convention programming, including the position I had just vacated. It was exactly the reaction we'd hoped for. Griffin had elevated Cairo's profile at the precise moment we wanted all eyes on him. Phase 2 began that evening, when an anonymous Reddit account posted a screenshot of Cairo's old tweet, "Women over 35 shouldn't cosplay unless they're my mom, LOL." The post was titled simply, "This is who's running Mythverse's Comic-Con presence now." The community response was immediate and fierce. Female cosplayers of all ages began sharing their experiences with ageism and harassment at conventions. The hashtag #VexGate started trending as users dug through Cairo's social media history, unearthing more problematic comments. Vivian called me at midnight, her voice electric with excitement. "It's working better than we expected. People are asking all the right questions, and they're finding answers on their own." Any response from Griffin? Nothing public yet, but my sources say there was an emergency call with the board this evening. He's feeling the heat. The following day, a screenshot appeared on Twitter, an internal Slack message from Griffin. "Female fans in cosplay are free advertising. We don't need them to be happy. We just need their photos." I recognized it immediately as one of the messages I'd saved, though I hadn't been the one to leak it. Someone else within Mythverse was clearly unhappy with the new regime. By day 3, sponsors began distancing themselves from Mythverse's upcoming convention events. A major gaming company announced they were reevaluating their partnership, following concerning reports about company culture. Griffin finally appeared on a hastily organized live stream, looking tired and defensive. He spoke about taking community concerns seriously and promised a thorough review of all social media policies. He announced that Cairo would be stepping back from public-facing roles pending this review. It was time for my move. I contacted Gloria Mathers, the attorney who had helped me negotiate Clause 27B years earlier. She was surprised to hear from me, but became immediately engaged when I explained the situation. "They fired you by text," she repeated, incredulous. "With no prior warnings or performance issues documented?" "Just 3 sentences and an emoji," I confirmed. She laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Sometimes I'm amazed these companies can function at all." She reviewed the clause and my termination message. "This is textbook without cause. We can proceed immediately if you want." "I do," I said firmly. "I want to enforce the clause in full." The cease and desist letter was delivered to Comic-Con's organizers the next morning, with copies to Mythverse Legal and Griffin personally. It stated in unambiguous terms that Mythverse no longer held the rights to any Comic-Con collaborations, as those rights had transferred to me upon my termination. The convention organizers responded within hours. They had no desire to be caught in a legal battle and would comply with the letter's demands. Mythverse's sponsorship was suspended. Their booth space would be reassigned, and all planned panels were canceled pending resolution. Griffin's panicked call came shortly after. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with Vivian sitting beside me in my hotel room. "Sam, we need to talk immediately. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Call me back as soon as you get this. This is extremely urgent." His voice cracked on the last word. "He sounds desperate," Vivian observed, sipping from a room service coffee cup. "He should be." Their quarterly projections relied heavily on the Comic-Con exclusives. Without them, they'll miss earnings targets by a wide margin. My phone buzzed again, an email this time from Mythverse's legal department, requesting an emergency meeting to resolve this unfortunate situation amicably. "Are you going to meet with them?" Vivian asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let them sweat a bit longer." But events accelerated beyond our control. That afternoon, a former Mythverse employee published a detailed account of harassment she'd experienced from Cairo at a private industry event. Her story included text messages and witness corroboration. Within hours, 3 more women came forward with similar accounts. One had been an intern at Mythverse who claimed she'd reported the behavior to HR and been told to consider the unique creative culture of the company. Cairo posted a rambling video apology that made everything worse, claiming he was being canceled for being real and suggesting the women were clout chasing. He deleted it within an hour, but not before it had been recorded and shared widely. Vivian called me in a state of controlled excitement. "This is bigger than we anticipated. I'm publishing a comprehensive piece tonight. Are you ready for me to include your story?" I hesitated. Until now, I'd been a shadow player in this unfolding drama. Going public would change everything. "Yes," I decided. "Use everything I gave you. It's time." Vivian's article dropped at 9 p.m. Toxicity, cover-ups, and retaliation, the complete Mythverse scandal. It was devastating in its thoroughness, connecting my termination to Griffin's history of ageist comments, detailing the Paris Expo payoff, and explaining how my contract clause had allowed me to pull the rug out from under their convention strategy. The piece included screenshots of Griffin's messages, documentation of the harassment settlements, and statements from former employees describing a culture of fear and discrimination that had flourished under his leadership. By morning, the story had been picked up by mainstream media outlets. Mythverse's stock dropped 15% at market open. Mythverse Exposed was trending worldwide. At 11 a.m., I received another call from Gloria. "The board wants to meet, not Griffin, the actual board of directors. They're suggesting a confidential settlement discussion." "What are they offering?" "They're not there yet. This is just an opening, but they're scared. Sam. Really scared." I considered my options. "Set it up for tomorrow. I want them to see the full market reaction first." The next day brought another 15% stock drop and the news that 3 major advertisers had suspended their campaigns on Mythverse platforms. Comic-Con organizers had already reassigned Mythverse's prime booth space and announced a special panel series on inclusion in fandom communities to replace the canceled Mythverse events. The meeting took place in a private conference room at Gloria's law firm. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the same outfit I'd worn to my last board presentation, a subtle reminder of the professional they'd discarded. 4 board members attended, notably without Griffin. They looked collectively haggard, as if none of them had slept properly for days. Gloria handled the initial formalities, then turned the floor over to me. "I appreciate you meeting with me," I began calmly. "I assume you've read Nexus Pulse's reporting?" The board chair, Eleanor Westfield, nodded grimly. "We have, and we want to express our deep concern about the events described. If we had been aware—" "You were aware," I interrupted, my voice steady. "The Paris settlement required board approval. It's documented in your minutes from March 2019. Eleanor's expression tightened. "That was under different management." "But the same board," I pointed out. "The same board that hired Griffin Cade despite his documented history of problematic statements. The same board that approved Kyrovex's hiring and expanded role despite multiple HR complaints." No one spoke for several seconds. "What do you want, Ms. Cole?" asked Richard Donovan, the newest board member. "Accountability," I replied simply. "Starting with Griffin Cade and anyone who enabled the behavior described in that article." Eleanor cleared her throat. "Griffin has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." "That's not enough." "What would be enough?" Richard asked, leaning forward. "His immediate termination. A public acknowledgement of the company's failures, financial compensation for affected employees, and a restructuring of leadership to prioritize ethical practices." The board members exchanged glances. "And your contract clause?" Eleanor asked. "The Comic-Con issue is causing significant financial damage." "That depends on how seriously you take my other conditions." Gloria passed them a document outlining my complete demands, including a substantial settlement for myself and a commitment to restructure the company's leadership with an emphasis on diversity and ethical governance. "This is extensive," Richard muttered, scanning the pages. "So was the damage done," I replied. The meeting concluded without a firm resolution, but their desperation was palpable. As Gloria and I walked out, she smiled. "They'll agree to most of it. They don't have a choice if they want to stop the bleeding." She was right. By evening, the board had accepted my core demands. Griffin was terminated effective immediately. A press release acknowledged serious lapses in judgment and leadership and announced a comprehensive review of company policies. My settlement was approved in principle, with details to be finalized in the coming days. The next morning, Mythverse announced that Kyrovex was no longer affiliated with the company. By afternoon, he had deleted all his social media accounts as more allegations continued to emerge. Griffin remained silent publicly, though I heard through industry contacts that he was furiously blaming everyone but himself for the company's implosion. Mythverse stock had lost 40% of its value in 3 days, erasing years of growth. 2 weeks later, I attended Emerald Hall Con in Dublin, a smaller, community-focused event that had always prioritized inclusivity over corporate sponsorships. Walking through the exhibition hall, I passed the space that would have been Mythverse's booth under the original convention plan. It now hosted a collection of independent artists and writers, their enthusiasm palpable. Vivian found me there, examining a hand-drawn comic from a new creator. "Hell of a comeback tour, huh?" she said, nodding toward her phone. The screen showed Mythverse's latest press release, announcing a new direction with a leadership team that included several respected industry veterans, including 2 former employees who had left during Griffin's tenure. I smiled, purchasing the comic and tucking it into my bag. Not a comeback, a fresh start. "Speaking of fresh starts," Vivian said, falling into step beside me as we moved through the convention hall. "I've been talking with my publisher about expanding Nexus Pulse. We're thinking of launching a dedicated platform for convention coverage and community building. Someone with 14 years of experience would be invaluable in shaping that vision." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job?" "More like a partnership, equal stake, creative control, and a chance to build something that reflects your values from the ground up." I considered her offer as we passed a group of cosplayers. women ranging from teenagers to their 60s, all dressed as different iterations of the same superhero across the character's evolution. They posed together for photos, celebrating their shared passion regardless of age. I'd want to prioritize inclusivity and transparency, I said. No compromises. Vivian nodded. That's exactly why I want you involved. What happened at Mythverse wasn't just about one bad CEO or one toxic influencer, it was about a system that enabled them. We can build something better. As we reached the exit, I turned for one last look at the convention floor. The joyful chaos, the creative energy, the community that had been my world for 14 years. I thought about Griffin's text message. Younger energy. What he'd never understood was that energy wasn't about age. It was about passion, integrity, and vision. I'm in, I told Vivian. Let's build something that lasts. She grinned, linking her arm through mine as we stepped out into the Dublin afternoon. I was hoping you'd say that. I already bought the domain. You were that confident? Please, she scoffed. I know the value of experience, and I know what happens when you underestimate Samantha Cole. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Griffin's text had been meant to end my career. Instead, it had opened the door to something new, something built on the foundations of accountability and respect that I'd always believed in. Sometimes, being fired is just the beginning. The settlement was finalized 3 days later. Beyond the financial compensation, Mythverse was required to implement sweeping changes to their workplace policies, including mandatory harassment training and a revised leadership structure with greater accountability measures. The company also issued a public apology specifically acknowledging their mistreatment of female employees and community members. Their statement ended with a commitment to re-examine our culture and rebuild trust with the communities we serve. As part of the agreement, I retained ownership of several community initiatives I developed during my tenure, programs that connected emerging creators with mentorship opportunities and provided resources for convention first-timers. Meanwhile, Vivian and I were deep into planning our new venture, tentatively named Convergence. We envisioned a platform that would bridge traditional convention coverage with year-round community engagement, emphasizing diverse voices and transparent practices. We need to be what Mythverse claimed to be. I explained during one planning session. A genuine amplifier for fan communities, not just a content mill exploiting their passions. Vivian agreed, adding, and we need to practice what we preach internally. Fair compensation, clear policies, genuine inclusivity. Our first test came sooner than expected. Dublin's Emerald Hall Con had been so impressed by our vision that they offered us exclusive coverage rights for their next event, an opportunity that would normally go to larger, established outlets. It's a vote of confidence, Vivian noted as we reviewed the proposal over lunch, but also a test. They want to see if we're truly different. I nodded, scanning the terms. We'll need to assemble a team quickly, people who share our values. I've been making a list, Vivian said, sliding her tablet across the table. Former colleagues, freelancers I've worked with, emerging talents who deserve a platform. The list included several names I recognized, respected professionals who had quietly left mainstream outlets over ethical concerns or lack of growth opportunities. It also featured promising newcomers from underrepresented backgrounds. This is a good start. I agreed. But we need to be careful about scaling too quickly. Quality over quantity. Always, Vivian promised. No cutting corners, no compromising standards. In the weeks that followed, we secured modest funding from independent investors who believed in our mission. We leased a small office space in London, nothing flashy, just functional. Our website launched with a simple mission statement and an open call for contributors. The response exceeded our expectations. Applications poured in from writers, photographers, and content creators across Europe and beyond. Many cited Vivian's Mythverse exposé as their inspiration for wanting to join us. People are hungry for change, I observed as we reviewed applications late one evening. They want to be part of something authentic. Something that won't fire them by text message, Vivian added with a wry smile. I laughed, though the memory still stung. Their loss, our gain. Our first major content push coincided with London's Autumn Comic Convention, the same event where I'd received Griffin's text 6 months earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I walked into the Excel Center, now wearing a Convergence press badge rather than Mythverse credentials. The convention landscape had shifted noticeably. Mythverse's presence was dramatically scaled back, a modest booth staffed by their remaining content team, most of whom I knew from my time there. They nodded politely as I passed, their expressions a mix of awkwardness and respect. In contrast, our Convergence coverage team moved through the convention with purpose and enthusiasm. We'd assembled a diverse group of 12 contributors, each focusing on different aspects of the event, from artist spotlights to cosplay celebrations, panel coverage to community stories. "How does it feel to be back?" asked Marcus, our lead photographer, as we regrouped near the main stage. "Different," I admitted, but in a good way. Less pressure to chase metrics, more focus on what actually matters to people. "Speaking of people who matter," he said, nodding toward the entrance. "Isn't that Cairo Vex?" I turned, surprised. Indeed. Cairo was slipping into the convention, looking noticeably different from his influencer days. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully styled hair. He wore a simple hoodie and looked like he was trying to avoid attention, a dramatic change for someone who had once live-streamed his entire existence. "Should we approach him?" Marcus asked. "Could make for an interesting story." I considered it briefly, then shook my head. "No, he's not our focus. The communities and creators here are." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Got it. I'm heading to the indie comics section. There's a collective of first-time publishers I want to feature." As the day progressed, I found myself increasingly at ease. Without corporate pressure to generate viral content or chase sponsorship opportunities, I could focus on genuine connections. I spoke with artists about their creative processes, listened to fans discuss what conventions meant to them, and documented the small, meaningful moments that big media often overlooked. By evening, our team had produced a rich tapestry of content that captured the convention's spirit in ways Mythverse never had. Our website traffic was modest compared to the industry giants, but engagement was extraordinary. Readers were commenting, sharing, and actively participating in the conversations we started. "This is just the beginning," Vivian said as we reviewed the day's metrics in our hotel room. "Wait until people realize there's an alternative to the corporate content mills." "It's not about competing with Mythverse or anyone else," I reminded her. "It's about creating something different." "Something better," she amended. "And speaking of better, have you seen the latest industry news?" She handed me her tablet. Open to a breaking story from a leading business publication. Griffin Cade faces investor, lawsuit following Mythverse collapse. The article detailed how shareholders were pursuing legal action against Griffin personally, alleging that his mismanagement and the resulting scandal had caused avoidable financial damage. "Can't say I'm surprised," I said, returning the tablet. "Actions have consequences." "Indeed they do," Vivian agreed. "Which reminds me, we received an interesting email today from Eleanor Westfield." I raised an eyebrow. "The Mythverse board chair? What did she want?" "To talk about potential collaboration. Apparently, they've been following our coverage and are impressed with our authentic community engagement." Her words, not mine. I laughed incredulously. "Are they serious, after everything that happened?" "I think they're desperate," Vivian replied. "Their numbers are still tanking, and they've lost credibility with core audiences. They need a lifeline. And they think we'll provide it? That's audacious." What should I tell them? I considered the question carefully. There was a certain poetic justice in Mythverse needing our help, but revenge had never been my goal. Tell them we're open to discussion, but only if they're willing to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to real change. No PR spin, no corporate doublespeak. Vivian nodded, making a note. "And if they agree, then we listen. Holding grudges doesn't help anyone, but we don't compromise our values either." The Mythverse meeting was scheduled for the following week at neutral territory, a conference room in a London business center. Eleanor arrived with two new executives I didn't recognize, suggesting the company's restructuring was well underway. "Thank you for meeting with us," Eleanor began, noticeably more humble than during our settlement negotiations. "We've been following Convergence's development with interest." "I'm sure you have," Vivian replied coolly. "What specifically interests you?" Eleanor glanced at her colleagues before continuing. "Frankly, your connection with convention communities, the authentic engagement you fostered in a short time, it's something Mythverse has lost." "You didn't lose it," I pointed out. "You actively discarded it when Griffin decided that younger energy was more valuable than experience and relationships." One of the new executives, a woman in her 50s introduced as their new head of community relations, nodded. "That's a fair assessment. We made critical errors in judgment, and we're still paying the price." "What exactly are you proposing?" Vivian asked, getting to the heart of the matter. Eleanor slid a document across the table. "A limited partnership. Convergence would provide community engagement consultation for selected Mythverse events. In return, we offer financial resources to accelerate your growth." I skimmed the proposal, noting the generous terms. "This is essentially you buying our credibility." "We prefer to think of it as investing in a shared future," the third executive suggested. Vivian and I exchanged glances. "We'll need to review this thoroughly," she said, "and discuss it with our team." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "Take your time." After they left, Vivian turned to me. "Well, what do you think?" I tapped the proposal. "The terms are better than I expected. No ownership stake, no editorial control, just a consulting arrangement. But it still feels wrong somehow, like we'd be betraying our mission before we've really established it." Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that concern. On the other hand, their resources could help us reach more people. Faster. At what cost, though? Our independence? Our credibility?" We debated the proposal for days, consulting with our growing team and seeking advice from trusted industry contacts. Opinions were divided. Some saw a strategic opportunity, others a compromise of principles. In the end, we declined Mythverse's offer with a counter-proposal. Instead of a formal partnership, we suggested a one-time collaboration on an industry-wide initiative focused on convention safety and inclusivity. No financial exchange, just shared expertise toward a common goal. To my surprise, Eleanor accepted our terms readily. "This actually aligns better with our new direction," she explained during a follow-up call. "Less corporate control, more community participation." The initiative launched 3 months later, a comprehensive resource for convention organizers, addressing everything from accessibility guidelines to harassment prevention protocols. Contributors included representatives from major and independent events across Europe, with Convergence and Mythverse serving as co-facilitators rather than controlling entities. The project generated substantial positive press for both organizations, but more importantly, it established new standards that quickly gained industry adoption. Several conventions implemented the suggested policies for their upcoming events, crediting the initiative for providing practical, community-informed guidelines. For Convergence, the project solidified our reputation as principled innovators rather than bitter disruptors. Our subscriber base grew steadily, attracting both readers and creators who shared our vision for more authentic media. As for Mythverse, the collaboration marked a turning point in their rebuilding efforts. Their stock began a slow recovery as they demonstrated genuine commitment to changing their corporate culture. They replaced most of their senior leadership with respected industry veterans, many of whom were women over 40.